Welcome to the Permaculture Herbalism segment of the Elder Tree podcast. I'm your co-host, Taj Cicluna of Botanical Education, a botanical educator, bioregional herbalist, and ore seeker. My work advocates for bioregional herbalism, where the well-being of ecosystems is held in equal regard to that of individuals. Through this lens, I strive to weave connection between communities, both human and other than human, cultivating a deep and reciprocal practice of herbalism. In this series, I'll be speaking with progressive permaculturalists and regenerative farmers who are reimagining how we grow, relate to, and heal with plants. Together, we'll explore how we can integrate plants into our homes, gardens, and daily lives as allies in connection and resilience. Join us as we delve deep into the art and science of permaculture herbalism, a living, breathing design system rooted in care, creativity, and renewal. Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Herbalism segment of the Elder Tree with Cassidy Moss of Moss Herbalism. And I'm really thrilled to have Cassidy here today because I have seen the way that herbalism is a lifestyle and gardening is just like breath to her. And I really want to make space for people like that in the world because I think that there's a quality of life that comes from gardening that we could all benefit from. And I would love Cassidy to speak to this today. She's a clinical herbalist, a gardener, and a herbal educator. So welcome, Cassidy.
Hi, I'm so happy to do this. And this is really my favorite piece of herbalism. And when I became a clinical herbalist, I don't think I imagined sitting on Zoom calls all day. It's not really what I imagined. And so, but that kind of is the reality of the work that I end up doing. And so, bringing gardening into my practice and growing the plants is kind of how I was able to really get back to the tangible connection to them, to the herbs, and to what I was, working with every day in kind of a very like heady sense, but grounded out in reality and actually being able to connect to these plants in my backyard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's a really big one because I don't think that a lot of people, when they're considering the path of herbalism and they go into being a clinician, like here in Australia, it's super clinical. And, I didn't imagine that either, like being on a computer all day. You think of a herbalist, you think about
Was it
plants.
really?
And yeah, in the degrees here, like most of the bachelor degrees, like you don't actually there's no gardening, there's no wildcrafting, there's no physical connection to the plants. It's all in brown bottled extracts. And surprisingly, here in so called Australia as well, a lot of people don't actually build their own dispensaries, which is something that I'm super passionate about. And
See,
having that
beautiful
connection to
medicine.
the plants is it to me that is the medicine.
Well, and I think that a lot of the programs are very not in the field, and I just think that they're kind of reducing a lot of the plants to products, like you said, like brown bottles. I have to admit there are plants that I haven't met in real life. There's definitely some of them still where I've just read about them and had them as a product, but I think I owe the plants the respect of at least meeting them and who they are in the wild, and if not, being able to really bring them into my backyard and see how they like to grow and really do them the service of cultivating and helping them on their journey if I'm going to use them and ask them to be helpful for us.
Definitely, and this is why I think that we're kindred spirits of some kind because I've always had this, even when I was quite young, learning about herbs. I had a book that I wouldn't read about the herb until I met the herb. And it was almost like this initiation experience of until I meet you, like I can't, the knowledge doesn't land. It would be almost like reading about a person and not
Yeah.
meeting them, or not seeing them face to face, which is, it happens all the time now, but it doesn't land in the same way. And so I definitely know what you're saying. I will always try to meet the plant, to grow the plant if I haven't met it in a wildcrafted way. And if not, then at least I feel like at least I've tried. Like, for example, I've tried to grow kava and like failed
How
miserably
did it
because
go?
I'm
I've
in
never grown kava. I want to hear.
okay, so I am in a very temperate region and it gets very like the frost's crazy. The winter is really cold here. It's not snow, but it gets ice and frosts. And I had this kava plant that I was literally on the wait list for like 4 years. And I was nursing this plant in the bathroom on a heat mat and everything. And for a while, it was going quite well. And then it started getting certain little gnats and insects on it. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
So I was looking everything up and I repotted it
Fungus
with all of
gnats,
this root
maybe.
stuff. Yeah, I repotted it with a natural fungicide on its roots and everything like that as well. And it's still like it started getting some new leaves and then all of a sudden it just went. And I was even in
Well,
the
and
process of making a little lead light greenhouse for this.
you can't say you didn't try, though.
No, and that's the thing. Like I use kava quite a bit in my practice. It's one of the exotics that I use because I'm a big fan of using herbs or working with herbs that are that are local or bioregional.
Bioregional, yeah.
Yeah, but, there's a few on my list that are more like, quote, unquote, "exotic" or from further away, and kava is one of them, but I know that, like, at least if I try and I continue to try, it's not like I'm not trying to have a
Well, and
relationship
I
with that.
think that like we should push the limits of what we can try to cultivate. And I think that like so rhodiola,
Mhm.
I have seen people cultivating it successfully in Seattle, even though we all thought it has to be further north. And so anytime we can, try and see what we can actually get to come up in our area. It's less exporting that we have to do and less that we have to like tax other environments. And so, I think we can really I think we should all try. I'm trying to do some like TCM herbs this year that
Which
will like
ones?
we'll see how it goes.
What are
I
you
have
trying at the moment?
Codenopsis. I have Codenopsis right now that is coming up just fine, and I have Astragalus, and I think both of those are actually going to do okay. And then Spilanthes is not really, a TCM herb, but that's a new one for me that I'm trying. So we'll see.
Has
And
there
then
been Oh, yeah, sorry.
no, what were you saying?
If, has there been any particular cultivation techniques or germination techniques or anything that you've had to do for these particular herbs?
Not really for those ones, but I do a lot of like cold stratification stuff or like a scarification process. And so I wrote a blog post too about this of different strategies on cold stratification and kind of faking that because we, in a kind of a temperate area, sometimes we don't get the process that these seeds kind of need. And so having that fake cold stratification is kind of how I've gotten a lot of success with some seeds. And so like I do typically like a fridge or a freezer situation about a month before. And then the other thing that I did one year we were moving and so I didn't get my stratification going in the time frame that I had really planned on it because it was too crazy. And then so what I ended up doing was I did a fake cold strat where I put them in sand. They wanted you to put them in like a reptile sand, like a very fine light colored sand so you could see the seeds, and then move them from the fridge to the freezer repeatedly over like a week. And I ended up getting pretty good results out of all of that, even with just a week period, because I was going back and forth every single day.
So was that strategy just to speed up the cold stratification?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah?
To try and
Because you
cut
keep
it down to
shocking
a
the
week.
seeds.
Basically they're freezing and then unfreezing, freezing, and so it's simulating a winter, cold melt on them.
Yeah.
And so it ended up working really well, and I was really surprised with the results. And then one of the other things that I started doing that is like it's a little bit of work up front, but it's so much easier later, which is I got these like mini ice cube trays, like they're itty bitty, like a centimeter like cube, and then there's like hundreds of them in this ice cube tray, and I just filled it with soil, and then I put seeds in every single one of the cubes and then put that in the fridge. So then when you pull them out, because the tricky part of the cold strat is fishing them out of the sand or the, paper towel or whatever. Well, they're already in the soil. And so you just take them out and you take these little frozen cubes, you put those directly into your cells and they grow from there. So that worked out really well too. And I was
That's
like,
a great strategy.
I felt very, I was an inventor, but it
Yeah,
worked really,
amazing.
really well.
Yeah. And we have actually quite a lot of subtropical and even tropical listeners here. Interestingly, I'm temperate, but it'd be really interesting to note even some of the species that you cold stratify with your seeds, just so some of the listeners know.
Yeah. So the poppies is the one that I see that they really like it the most. And the poppies I find withstand just going right into the freezer. And so a lot of people were just doing ice cube trays that they fill with water and seeds and then just freeze them and put them right into the ground. And the poppies, like, like opium poppies and stuff, do just fine with that. And then like even the California poppies, I find like that, even though they'll probably come up without it. Pretty much everything except for like Tulsi, Tulsi doesn't need that, but like, oh, I'm trying to think of, I did skullcap and I did echinacea. I'm trying to think of my whole
Echinacea is one
list.
that a lot of people don't know that as well. Like, a lot of people, when they try and germinate echinacea, they don't understand why it's not necessarily working for them, and it's because the echinacea does really well with the cold stratification, same as California poppy. Like, here in a temperate region, I can just if you're early enough, you can put the seeds in the ground in the, like the late summer, and I mean, in the autumn, and then they'll cold stratify through the winter and then they'll pop up in the spring. But if you don't necessarily live in a place with high amounts of frosts, then the freezer is your friend.
Well, and we are in the weirdest place in Seattle where like we got a day of snow this year. And so it's kind of very variable. And like I know, do you guys know about the US zones?
Zones, yeah, we have a
Yeah,
different zone, but yes.
but so we're like the same zone as Texas. And it's so weird because we're so far north, but we're the same zone as Texas. And that's just because of our like frost level. So we don't get that cold. It's just a weird kind of dance that we have to do, especially when I'm teaching people that are in different places, as throughout the US and stuff, because it really depends on what conditions you're working with. And then ultimately, I always say, like, what is our goal? It is to think about how does this plant want to grow and try and get as close as we can, And like, I think one of the biggest revelations I had is the annuals versus the perennials. And I keep like coming back to think like a plant, if I can think like a plant, like the annuals have to come up. They have to be eager to sprout because if they don't, then their line stops, And so the annuals sprout pretty easily, but our perennials, they can be pickier because the plants are established. And so they can wait for those ideal conditions. And so those are the seeds I find that need a little coaxing and need a little bit of help.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because a lot of people when they get into medicinal gardening, especially after something like vegetable gardening, the germination rates aren't as high, and that's because the medicinal plants are more like their wild ancestors, and some of them are, pretty much still wild. And so they actually have built into them successive germination. They're not built to actually germinate completely successfully because they
All
want to
at the
be staggered sometimes throughout the years because that leads to more successful germination for years to come and future generations. So sometimes people, when they're getting into medicinal gardening, can feel like they're not doing as well, especially if they've come from a background of vegetable gardening. And yeah, these plants, they sometimes wait more, especially the perennials.
and I think your seeds matter too. I have been playing with seed sourcing, and like I think an unfortunate thing about the industry is there are like small vendors that they're just buying bulk seeds and packaging them up. And so like really trying to learn about where are these coming from? Who is gathering them? How far are we from the source of these plants? Or is this, a situation where they're just like being repackaged, and, bought in bulk bags, and who knows how they're being handled or how old they are? And I just, I've gotten some bad batches sometimes.
Yeah. And this is the thing that I'm really discussing a lot at the moment is that within the industry of herbalism, a lot of people think that because it's herbal, it's ethical. Because it's botanical, it's ethical. And this is with their like the medicines and products, but it's also with things like seeds. And this brings even the political element into the realm of what we do because a lot of the time, if people are thinking about profit, and you actually really need to start looking into the source of what you're sourcing, because it means that you might be actually
It's tricky.
contributing to certain practices that you don't actually want to be contributing to, and you want to localize them or support people that are actually really focusing on quality and the environment and
And
humanitarian.
I think at the end, it's the same thing as, herbalism being kind of like this concept of they're all products, and like reducing it down to this. And, gardening is such a way that we can reduce impacts on wild populations. Like if we are cultivating ourselves, we are reducing how much has to get mined out of the Amazon, basically, But doing this responsibly on the other end, like are we contributing to invasive populations? Who are we voting for our dollars? Like who are we supporting with our money? Um, and I think that often we can do less. Like we can just use more herbs that are local again. Get your own seeds, gather your own seeds and wildcraft your own seeds in the fall and the autumn. Is a super easy way to know exactly where those plants are coming from. And then also those herbs are going to grow better if they already come from the environment that you are harvesting them and planning on growing them in. Those are going to be hyper acclimated to growing in your area. They're going to be resistant to the fungal diseases that are in your area. They're going to be able to thrive with the amount of rainfall that you typically have. There's microclimates and stuff that you can do in a garden, but in general, those are the plants that are going to thrive. And so I really do think trying to work in a community level in the most tangible, like as close to you way that you can is really obviously going to be like the best. And then if we have to outsource to larger corporations, demanding transparency, we're the consumers and we have some power here. And so asking these brands to tell us where they're getting this stuff from and if they're doing it in an ethical way, I think it's important.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me how hard it can be sometimes to find the information of source. And, this is the why I'm such a massive advocate for localizing herbalism. And, it's not that I'm saying that people have to like create their whole dispensaries themselves and things, but if people are creating more of them and are localizing this and also being just aware of the social, environmental, humanitarian implications of what they're sourcing, then yeah, I think that that will actually just lead to better outcomes for the industry. There's because I've been reading quite a bit about the herbal industry in the last few years and about how there's like primary producers and secondary producers. And when there's primary producers are mainly in, developing, underdeveloped countries that, like India, South America, Asia. And then a lot of that herbal material is actually goes to Europe for a lot of manufacturing because there they have the
Yeah.
machinery and the legalities and things like that. Whereas the primary producing, that there's hardly any legalities around that. So it's more so about
Well,
how it's then processed.
and then you have to think about, are these people being treated well? Is the
Exactly.
land that these herbs are being grown on, like I think about heavy metal stuff all the time. And, when we get outside of regulation, which is its own debate, like how regulated should it be. But if we have no documentation, we just don't know what land those herbs are grown on. And so there's kind of two factors. Is it healthy for the people that are doing this labor and cultivation? And is it healthy? Are the plants healthy, and the product actually healthy? And so, you know, I kind of feel like there's a front end and a back end on both of those things. Like I could always just be caring about how good the herb is for me and if the cultivation practice is of benefit to me and my health, but I do care also about like the people, and are these
Yeah.
people getting a fair wage and good conditions?
Definitely. And I think that, like, to me, there's no separation in some ways. And I feel like it's really
Yeah.
strange, actually, that in some of the, herbal world, like, we've just become so disconnected in so many ways. And things are quite easy in the global north to obtain in certain ways that
Yeah.
it's crazy for me to think that the health of an ecosystem is separate to the health of an individual. And this is where I do see the gardening and wildcrafting coming in so much, because it seems actually, in some ways, completely crazy to me that you can be a herbalist without these practices, without gardening and
Well,
wildcrafting.
and
And
that it's an industry at all almost, like this is something that used to be accessible to anybody at all. The poorest people still had access to plant medicines. And, when I kind of have seen the commodification and, people are paying massive amounts for these supplements and then I get some clients and are like, I can't afford this. I'm taking 20 pills, supplements a day. And I'm like, we can do this with what's in your backyard. We can do
yeah,
this work without having this massive cost and expense and disconnection, from this medicine. We can find plants that aren't going to cost you anything that can do this work with you.
yeah.
I think there's some, yeah, I just think that it's been disconnected from what it really used to be.
Well, it's a part of our culture, like, and that's everyone's culture. Like, everyone's culture comes from having a relationship with plants. Is everyone's ancestry is ethnobotanic, and I'm not also saying to people, like, I don't want people, listeners, to think that I'm saying that you're not a herbalist, or you can't be a herbalist if you don't have access to a garden either. I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm so such an advocate for foraging and wildcrafting. I'm just an advocate for connection to the plants, not necessarily ownership of land to have that
Yeah.
connection.
But, even in the smallest spaces, you can grow. And I think it's just such a rewarding experience, even if it's not an amount that is like, maybe you're growing one plant and it's enough to make a cup of tea. I just think that the connection that you get from it and growing your own or foraging and wildcrafting, is it's real and authentic. It's a real authentic version of these plants. And I think there's a lesson here underlying all of it of using less. And my teachers would be like really insistent on us trying to avoid the word use the plants and trying to reframe that as less of a consumptive relationship and more of a reciprocity and a partnership and working together with these things. And I do think that you have to see them alive and not as kind of these powdered brown things in jars to get that connection. And there's local gardens. I really think there's something in our soul that wants to work in the ground and to grow things and to be outside. And, even in the smallest ways, like it is so beneficial to be able to bring that into your practice.
Well, for me, it actually leads to a quality of life that I think that a lot of people are really craving. You've got the, sunlight, you've got the soil, you've got the microbes, you've got the movement of your body. I feel like also, like, gardeners have a different idea of the cycle of life and death. There's certain things that gardens teach you that I don't think that you get from books. And you can, try as you might, you can learn all of the biomedical theory and all of this, but if you don't have like the actual tangible relationships, I do actually think that there's something within our souls that can be really missing, or that we're craving or yearning for, definitely.
It's almost over intellectualizing it. And I think that I had like a personal battle and who am I as an herbalist for so long because I love phytochemistry and I love, to really break down all of the pieces of clinical practice and how to best work with clients and serve them. And I am a spiritual person as well. And I thought for a really long time, I need to make sure that that is a separate thing. And herbalism is maybe the best example of a field where those two things exist at once. And there are people that are really embodying this in a beautiful way where they understand the science and they understand, all of the chemical processes that are happening when we put herbs into our body, but they still know that there's something more to it. There's something beyond all of that. And I love to see that can coexist. And I think herbalism marries that together in a beautiful way where there is intuition and there are energetics of people and being able to do both of the work and understand medication contraindications and all that stuff. I do all that work, and then also sometimes the plants will tell me what what they need, or the people that they need to be with, and I check that against their meds, but I also listen to that data.
Yeah, you're definitely speaking my language because I have like, for a long time have been, the kind of herbalist that because I love phytochemistry. It's actually one of my greatest passions. And I also love ritual and I have a very, uh, the, the kind of path that I've had with medicine and medicinal gardening and plants, that is my spirituality. Like I can't actually describe it, but it is so linked to what I feel my spirituality is. And at the same time, there's all of this science that I absolutely love, and I used to think that it had to, that well, it's actually hard. Like it's funny, it's hard to market those things together because the world exists in subjects, and it
I know.
loves to kind of just break things apart that I feel are designed to be looked at as more of an equilibrium or a web. And so I feel like that's part of my what I advocate for is you're really showing people that web of herbalism and the depth of it.
And I kind of just meet people where they're at and what they are looking for out of, from my client, and what they will be, how they will find the most connection to these plants. And if I need to understand the mechanism, if I need to explain the mechanism of action for them to feel like this is really a valid thing, I will do that and meet them there. And then also being able to sometimes tell people, here is the history of this plant and how it's worked with people and how it's helped humanity for thousands of years, and here's some stories, and here are the kind of archetypes that this herb is really associated with. I love when I'm able to kind of get through that piece as well and connect to somebody in that way. And I just, you know, you said earlier, like, there is no part of humanity that is not tied in with plants. Like, there's not a single bit where we haven't been in relationship with plants. I think it's the biggest attraction to herbalism is I'll never run out of
Things
things
to
to
learn.
learn. Yeah, yeah.
And I'm really interested as well, like how do you incorporate gardening into your herbal practice? So obviously is like, part of perhaps some part of your dispensary, but you also do you work with with clients that want to garden, or how do you actually bring
Yes.
that into their
Yeah.
lives?
So I have an herb gardening course that's out right now on how to like plan a garden from scratch. So that came out, and that really is start to finish. Like, I don't know a single thing about gardening. This is the whole structure, and you can apply that whole framework into vegetable gardening. And so that's what I set it up for. And but then when I work with clients, I mean, just before this, I had a client and she said, could we adjust my formula, but also would you give me some one-on-one on how to grow? And we spent the session talking about, okay, so this is in your tea and this is in your tea. You could wildcraft this one, so let's plant this one, and you've got your tea blend in your backyard this year. And so it's some of my very, very favorite work is to get people as close as we can in contact with the plants they're working with.
Yeah, same. I often will I have a lot of clients that are interested in gardening or foraging, and so I'll include in their notes. It's not just a protocol of take this at this time. It's literally here's the plant, here's some plant ID. You can ask me for like to identify the plant with you as well. You know, send me photos, make sure that you're getting it right,
Yeah.
and encouraging people to go and wildcraft and then make their own medicines as well. So I'll include little recipes as well because I don't want the route to their health stopping at me or being dependent on me either. You know, like yes, there are
Yeah.
certain things that I produce that they might not be able to get their hands on. Great, I'm here, but I also really want them to feel empowered that if they need to stop our sessions or if they do stop our sessions, then these the methods that they can actually embed into their lives and they become habitual as well. I'm really big on creating habits for people and for herbalism to be a habit and a way of life rather than just something that you outsource from someone.
Well, and growing it is one of the easiest ways to get there, right? Because, you're growing your California poppy, you're going to tincture enough to get you through, till next year. You really can get into the cycle and the habit of the herbs that you're going to reach for, how much you're going to need for yourself or the ones around you. And I do think that kind of the difference between, we like our Western medical doctors and stuff is that an herbalist and their client, this is a collaborative effort. We are working together, and I am trying to give you information and empowerment so that you understand this formula. I don't just want to write you a formula. Some people want that. Some people don't want to think about it at all. But if they're willing, I want to tell you why we're putting these things in here so that you are starting to understand the pieces of your own body, the patterns that, maybe I've recognized with you, but really give over that so that they become, hopefully by the end, their own herbalist and, you know, get to play with these plants in their own way. Educational is really what the
Yeah,
sessions are.
definitely. Yeah, I often encourage people to, if they can, even like if they've got a small space, to grow their own. And I'm really interested to know if there's any plants that you particularly love planting together. Like I love creating, even in little pots, I love creating polycultures because there's so many different plants that like each other that grow in similar kind of climates that you can put together. And I'm wondering if you have certain little polyculture recipes that you love.
I'm trying to think, calendula is so easy. Let me think. Maybe like I would do, okay, I'm on the fly here. I would do something that remains in the ground, like a perennial, so that we can keep like our mycorrhizal networks going, and then some annuals around it. And so, maybe we have some motherwort, and then we have calendula, and then I'm trying to think who else could go in this little batch. And then maybe we could bring something that needs to be grown for the roots so it would come out, but I want to keep a perennial to leave that mycorrhizal. So, I don't know, maybe we're gonna put some valerian or some marshmallow in that on the
And they're
periphery.
very, there's similar climate species as well. Yeah. One thing that
Yeah,
I
I'm
noticed
thinking.
as well is that you can often tell plants that they grow well together. They look good together. Just,
Yeah.
I remember growing motherwort underneath a elder tree and just being like, "Oh, yeah. Oh, this is good." You can just tell that they like that
Yeah.
relationship and the way that they grow together is beautiful, and then, like so I'd have the elder, and then underneath that have the motherwort, and then underneath that, I had, lady's mantle
Mhm.
and betony, wood betony as
Mhm.
well,
Okay,
and
and you guys, what is your wood betony? Is that stackies?
yes,
Because I know there's two.
yes, stackies. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my wood betony too. Yeah, yeah. There's another one too that gets called wood betony that I don't work with as often. I We had those beautiful wood betony flowers, and they're kind of pokey. I was making my son process that, and he was like, "Why'd you make me do this?"
One thing that I won't process anymore is like, and I've tried. I don't know you if you have any tricks on this, but I cannot stand processing burdock seed. I just like with
Oh,
the
yeah.
little hairs that just get
I
in
don't have an
everything, and
answer.
they feel like fiberglass. And I was just like, no, I am not doing this
Well,
anymore.
because it was an inspiration for Velcro,
Yeah, yeah, but it's like all of the tiny
right?
hair, like not even just
Yeah.
the Velcro bits, but the little hairs that get everywhere, and
Hmm.
they're so itchy. And I look, if any of the listeners even have any comments that they want to put up of how they do it, I'm sure that there is a way, even maybe
I'm
that's
sure
not
there's
as
a
home
contraption
scale.
that they can
There's a
do.
contraption, yeah, rather than
Yeah.
my
My
mere hand.
fingers. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I look, I like because I like having, utilizing different parts of a plant. I work with burdock root mainly, but I do like having some of the seed tincture on hand as well. But that
Hmm.
just really is quite a pain to process. And this is the other thing about, like processing your own plants. You get this reverence for them that I don't think that a lot of people really understand unless you do it. It's kind of like making cheese or something. You don't really understand how long it takes or all of the process that goes through it if you just like grab it from the shop. But
Well, I
if
think,
anyone oh, yeah.
well, I'm thinking about like milk thistle, right? And
I was
how,
gonna say,
yeah, and like how it would be obvious that this thing can't go into a tea because it's a big hard seed, Like, but you wouldn't know that unless you really were holding it in your hands as as a real thing.
yeah, the working with the plants actually really teaches you a lot about how to kind of treat them so that they'll be pharmacologically like active really in the body. I mean, you can see, do they have like a seed coat? Is it waxy? Do they look like they need to be, even for germination, for example, like do they look like they need to be scarified? So there's
Hmm.
certain seeds that you look at and you're like, well, that's got a really thick seed coat. And it looks like it needs to be scarified, which, for those that might not know, like mimics in the wild animals usually getting to the seed and gnawing on them a little bit, and it opens up the seed coat and then makes it easier for a lot of the starches and things like that to access water.
And then we can do it by a little bit of sandpaper, just
Mm.
scratching it up. The lupin flowers, which is not a medicinal, but they need to be scarified too.
And a passion flower is one that
I
I've
haven't done
scarified
passion
before.
flower.
Yeah, I've only done it once because here it's yeah, I need a greenhouse for the plant. Oh.
I've never done passion flower via seed. I've always gotten a start.
Mm. Yeah, I live in a temperate zone, so I need a greenhouse for passion flower or
Hmm.
a microclimate for the passion flower. But I only just started growing it this year. But I know
From
that it's
seed.
one. I actually grew it from a cutting, but I've done in other in more tropical, subtropical regions. I've done the scarification thing with it.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
just got a greenhouse again, and I feel so spoiled. I haven't had a greenhouse in 5 years. I was so kind of what I was doing before was a like LED light setup with like a grow tent, which is it felt a little fake, right? And so, but it works really well. And so then this year I'm back to greenhouse growing, and the biggest like thing that I have experienced from the greenhouse growing is it's just slower. And, we have colder nights, and I have to be like, oh, yeah, like I'm not blasting these seedlings with a bunch of artificial light and heat. It's going to
Mhm.
be slower. And just like living into that. I tried a few new things too this year, which were kind of trial and error, and that's how you grow and how you become a good gardener is just trying stuff. But I wanted to figure out a electric free heat setup, and so I was reading about this guy who takes compost like manure. He takes like hot horse manure and was using that to heat his greenhouse. And so I didn't do a full scale. Like I thought that was absolutely brilliant though. But I just put some underneath my trays, these metal trays, just to get my seeds going. And so far, so good.
Yeah. I've seen that set up as well, where you can actually like you make little compost even rows underneath the seedlings. So you're basically actively making compost in your greenhouse, which speed up the compost as well. And then you keep going in and turning it, and then you have all of this compost that you can sieve to then for your seedling trays as well. Because I will always sieve my soil and compost so that it gets all fluffy and you get better germination rates, I think.
It's absolutely brilliant, right? And it like works together. I just thought that was the best idea I had seen in a long time. And then, my error part of the whole piece was I tried to do plastic free and do the soil blocking. Have you done this?
Yes.
What do you think?
It dries out really fast. Yeah, I
Mine
feel like
just,
they dry
I
out
don't know
fast.
what I did. So I
Yeah.
went back to the cells just because that's what I know and I know it works well. And maybe I'll try again later.
Look, it's nice to try these things, I think. Like, one of the things that I really love using is I have these massive plastic crates. They're big plastic crates with lots of, like, slits in them, and
Hmm.
I actually use those a lot of the time to germinate in because it ends up being you get a lot more root growth because of the height of them. They have a lot of aeration. Yes, you do have to do thinning out and things like that. They're not, like, just in little kind of blocks, but then I can also just keep reusing those. And I think that, like, petrochemicals
Yeah.
in the right places are extremely useful. Plastics in the right place, I think, can be extremely useful as well. And especially if you can keep reusing them. So that's what
Well,
I
and
do.
if we think about sustainability, if you already have the plastic, use it, Like, right? If you already have it, don't throw it away.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of, like, when I teach people about gardening and, you have to make it accessible too, so I often
Yeah.
will say, like, if something's gonna stop you from doing something, then, like, it's better that you do it than you don't. So
Then
you
you
just
try to
got
do it the most perfect way and it's
Yeah,
overwhelming. Yeah. Well,
exactly.
and then another error I made was I was like, oh, I will get these stainless steel trays. That's what I could use in this soil blocking setup. And I bottom water, so I needed the trays to have holes to bring the water up. And we drilled all these holes, and the such a foreseeable turn of events is they all rusted. And so I'm back to my plastic trays that have worked for years and years.
Interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about the bottom watering and if you do that with all your
Yeah.
herbs or some of them and your reasons behind it?
Yeah, so pretty much all of them. In the beginning, I keep the top misted, because we're trying to germinate stuff. So, after they have come up and they're established enough that I'm not super worried about them drying out, I stop misting. Through the whole process, I'm bottom watering, and there's a couple reasons for it. The first one is fungus gnats live on the top. A lot of fungal stuff lives on the top layer of the soil. And so being able to let that dry out a little bit, not to the point where our seedlings are dying and too dry, but to prevent kind of some of those fungal pathogens, I really find a decrease in algae and, fungal issues. The other reason I like to bottom water is because it asks the plants to dig for water. And so we establish better root systems by asking them to come down to the bottom of the cell where the water is coming up from. And it also kind of prevents overwatering because the cells will only take up as much water as they can really hold that way instead of just soaking the whole soil. I almost said menstruum, the soil, which is our menstruum here.
Yeah. It is evidence from the soil, and so,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. I guess as well with the bottom watering, do you have to do then just, are you manually watering that and a few times a day, or are you actually still relying on the sprinkler system to fill that reservoir?
So I am a small hobby gardener. And
Mhm.
so my system is small enough that I can manually water that. And I'm only really doing it once a day. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so my environment is also really wet already. But I can handle manually watering, and I have so much fun. It's my only little break. It's like in the middle of the day, oh yes, I have to go and deal with my seedlings. So again though, this is not a large scale setup. This is definitely not a farm in any way. And so I'm just manually watering.
I think that's great though, because I think it speaks to a lot of listeners here, because when people talk about permaculture, like quite often it can be very overwhelming because it's a lot of the time can be on a farm scale. Yes, there's like retro suburbia things and there's certain things that people can do. However, I feel like with a lot of herbalists, it is accessible to have small medicinal gardens and see how that actually supplements your practice. I'm a big believer in
Well,
that.
and being choosy about what you're going to invest in if you have a small space is kind of, I think about what can I not wildcraft? What is something I really want to have access to fresh that would be like wild for me to try to ship from some farm fresh? Ashwagandha root or something, I really want that fresh. So I've been playing with ashwagandha, like growing ashwagandha for myself. Things that are really it's a really great way to make a small space valuable because herbs are often more valuable than vegetables. And so, I think about I'm not going to grow a pack of carrots. I can get a pack of carrots for $2, but I could use that same amount of space and grow a really valuable herb that I can then tincture and make a year's worth of medicine from one pot. And so I just think it is such a good utilization if you have a small space to be growing medicinal plants.
What do you think are some of the plants that you've gotten like and not that I want to make it all about like yield or anything, but I think this is important. If people have small spaces, what are the herbs that you think give a really great yield for the amount of space that they cover?
Yeah. I'm thinking a lot about like root stuff that I tincture. So like I'm thinking about valerian. I'm thinking about cut and come again flowers, calendula and chamomile and feverfew. Like if you have a little pot of those things, that could produce enough medicine for you for a decent chunk of the year. I am thinking about the like, oh my gosh, marshmallow root. If you just leave it for a few years, what I was doing with my marshmallow was I was using the leaves for the first 2 years. I would cut it back towards the end of the season before it died. I wouldn't let it just go to brown, and I would use all of those leaves. And I feel like the leaves are such an underutilized thing about from the marshmallow plant. Like they do have demulcency, they taste good, and we can get some of the benefits without having to dig the whole plant up by using the leaves the first few years, and then on that second or third year harvesting the whole root. I mean, we got enough marshmallow, and often I am using my home apothecary just for us, my home garden to just support us. And I mean, we got a good amount of marshmallow root from a single marshmallow plant. And it's also beautiful. Like, if people are here using their yards for ornamentals, and it's like, oh my gosh, you can have this beautiful plant that also is supplying medicine for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it really interesting with the root crops that quite often a lot of them are biennials or perennials. Then what I'll end up doing is, yeah, using the aerial parts for the first few years. This is things like valerian, echinacea, and marshmallow, and then on the usually like the third year or so, I'll then harvest the roots. However, I'll end up the year before I would have already put seed in for new plants as well. So thinking of that kind of succession as you're going.
Yeah, the cycle of it. And then, the fun dance of, well, I'm going to be digging this up, which means I'm going to have some ground, to work with in that area. And like the dance of the garden that, evolves as you move plants around and you dig them up and you know, and then you have your kind of pillar, your ones that stay and are the fungal network hubs, which is the kind of the big thing I have been obsessed with lately is mycorrhizal networks and how we can work with our fungal friends in the
So what are
garden.
some ways that you've been actually, yeah, utilizing that and bringing that into your garden and your practice?
Well, okay, not to get too I don't want to get
We're about
too
to get nerdy
deep.
here.
Yeah, the good stuff. No, okay, so the whole basis is the idea. and it's a theory, sure, but I think it's a pretty backed up one, where you can produce better medicine by not pampering your plants all the way. And so some of that is, if we're providing external fertilizers, the plants are less likely to make fungal connections with mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. And so if they can already get, all of the nutrients that they want from outside external inputs, they're less likely to want to trade with fungal partners that are going to bring them those nutrients from other places of the soil. And so encouraging, by not giving so much inputs and encouraging those connections and giving them challenges too. That is the other lovely thing about herb gardening is they don't always want the perfect soil. They don't want the richest. They don't always want, all of the watering all of the time with full sun. They do well with a challenge, and a lot of the medicinal constituents are created through them having to overcome challenges. They have to produce these medicinal constituents to keep pests away, or to attract pollinators, or to withstand droughts. And so an herb gardener can be a little lazy.
Well,
It's
mullein here
it,
grows in
so
gravel.
yeah, they want disturbed, crappy soil sometimes. And so really thinking about, okay, how does this herb grow in the wild? And what can I do to encourage stronger medicinal kind of phytochemistry happening through, replicating some of those challenges. And the fungal networks is the coolest thing. And to tie a bow on this whole thing, I think kind of the biggest thing, a takeaway that I've been learning through the years of gardening, is leaving some roots in the ground. And so I've been doing cover crops that I terminate, but I don't dig up. And so they are still in the ground and the fungal partners are still on those roots, and then can make connections with the new plants that I plant in there. All of that turns, the biomass, and it's all a network.
Yeah. And that's just a really good thing, a really good take home as well that people can actually utilize is cover cropping and leaving roots actually in the ground, because a lot of the bacteria is on the roots, a lot of the exudates and sugars, and a lot of the fungal networks and things like that. And if it's not like a running species that we want to, eradicate from our gardens, then I'm
Hmm.
all for keeping the roots intact as much as I can.
Yeah. And like, I will just talk sometimes about like choosing the plants, if we really want to work with something and bring it into our garden, you are now a steward of it. And so, we do have to be like, your mint's got to go in a pot, my friends. We can't let it, go. Is mullein invasive in your area?
Yes.
Yeah. And like, if we're going to grow these things, getting them ahead of them going to seed, doing what we can to be good stewards if these guys are particularly aggressive.
Yeah, and stewards of the broader ecosystem as well, because that's what I think that like if we're passionate about health, surely like we're passionate about the health of an ecosystem, not just the health of an individual. And it was really funny. I was in Ireland last year and explaining to some of the people there when I was at a ancestral skills course that hawthorn was invasive where I live. And it
Mm,
blew their absolute minds. They were like, "What do you mean?" Because there's this sacred tree, and, like,
yeah.
I also feel like it's sacred, I use it a lot, but I will go and wildcraft it, and I won't plant it or anything like that, and just thinking about the practices that the ways that I wanna engage with the plant so that it can benefit the broader ecosystem as well.
Well, and I did a post the other day that was like on invasive, um, plants versus native plants versus endemic plants versus naturalized plants. And there is, some debate that was happening about even the plants that are naturalized are taking the space of a native plant in that ecosystem. Have a hard time sometimes finding, where is this line? Because there are so many plants that are not aggressive and have found their way, and they're not invasive, but they aren't native to that area. And so I think there is something about ecosystems evolve, and I don't think we need to eradicate anything that's not native, but it's definitely room for debate. Some people would say that we need to try to restore everything to only native plants. I think that that is maybe noble, but not a reality. And so, let's my opinion is a little bit, there's very little effort, very little human power going around to restore these ecosystems. Let's focus on the invasives.
Yeah. And look, I think not that I'm an ecologist either. Like, I just have a ecological kind of like focus, but I'm not an ecologist. And it is a very complex science as well. So I think that sometimes if we're going to, we have to really be aware of the nuances of ecology, because
Yeah.
there isn't just like a blanket answer. It's usually like species dependent. So if that species is naturalized, do we actually, will that space benefit from taking that naturalized plant species out? And then will that mean that it gives room for the endemic species then to come up? Or is it that the endemic species of that bioregion actually need to be planted in place of that naturalized species for it to actually start to flourish? So
Which I think
there's
often
ways.
they would need to be, totally put it. And then we have to think about, though, who is now dependent on the naturalized species? What animals are we also, who down the food chain and are we affecting? And I think we want to always play God and as humans and like play, decide and put our morals. And I think that it's a tricky and slippery slope sometimes. Uh, I'm all for getting rid of invasive plants. I think it is. It's more nuanced and complicated than we always understand. Yeah,
I think,
and herbalists in general, we get to use often the invasives, and so,
yeah. That's where I'm at
hope.
a lot here. Like, we've got a lot of obviously like invasive and naturalized Western herbal medicine species here. And I will, obviously being mindful that I don't know everything because I'm not an ecologist, but it means that I feel like I get to work with a lot of these plants, sometimes without the fear of over harvesting and certain like ecological ramifications like that as well, which is great. And not that I just go crazy, because I also try and think non-human centrically, because is this plant actually fulfilling a niche in this ecosystem?
Yeah.
Is it providing nectar? Is it, there's a lot of things to
Hmm.
think about. And I don't want that to necessarily overwhelm people, but it's more, I think, about having the discussions and starting to open your way of thinking rather than
Totally.
having the
Like, let's
answer.
be open to, exactly, like, let's be open to a whole web of things that are more complicated than us humans can really quantify and map out all the time. And I think we really want to think we could have it all figured out. And it's, just like I said, that's the beautiful thing of herbalism. We never will. We will never have all of these answers, but we can try to be as good stewards of this land as we can be, and understand as much as we can from the plants and the land.
Very true. I feel like that is a beautiful space to wrap up with what you've just said as well. I feel like obviously we could talk for a very, very
We could
long
go
time.
forever. We could go forever.
So we might have
I'm
to stick
holding
to that.
back all of my other.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So maybe if the listeners want to give us a little bit of, yeah, in the comments, want to, if there's anything that people would like to know or for Cassidy to discuss further, then perhaps at some stage we can organize another interview, because this has been absolutely
It would
amazing
be a
to talk to
treat.
you.
It would be a treat.
And I know that we would be friends if we lived in
I
the
know.
same country or state. So
I
thank you
know.
so much for
Well,
your
thank
time
you so
today.
much.
Is there anything that you wanted to let listeners know about? Like, you said your gardening course, but is there anything else that is going on for you that you want to let listeners know about at the moment?
Yeah, so I have the herb garden planning course, which is self-guided, and that is on mossherbalism.com. So check that out if you want just guidance on starting from the beginning. And then I see clients one-on-one, and I do that worldwide. So if anybody was interested in working with me, that is what I'm doing. I've got a couple projects in the works right now that I'm not quite ready to release
Oh,
into the world, but exciting new things. But those are my big ones that I'm doing right now.
excellent. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I'll look into it. You'll get links to all of these offerings in the show notes as well. And thank you so much, Cassidy, for making the time for us today. I've had a really beautiful conversation with you.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me here on the Elder Tree. Please share this episode with someone you think may benefit from its narrative. The way we approach living systems can have profound impacts on environmental and social justice, so please remember that these acts of resilience, however small, are deeply necessary for the protection of our wild kin. Together, here at the Elder Tree, through these conversations and what we learn, we are working to cultivate change. You can unlock access to our treasure trove of wisdom by joining our Patreon, where we put medicine in the hands of the people. You can access this via the show notes and our website. Like, subscribe, and share however you can, as your support allows our vision to grow. You are the root system of the Elder Tree.